Today we start chapter 6. All right. The videos for chapter 6 were posted, as well as the slides. Hopefully that helps you. There's a couple different parts to the videos. There's part 1, part 2 for one lecture, and then I ended up switching from Edu Creations to Explain Everything, and then from now on, all the videos will be on the Bioscience YouTube channel, which you all have access to. Okay. So if you want to go, and then all the links are also up on Moodle. Okay. Chapter 6 is your introduction to metabolism. Okay. And metabolism has everything to do with making or storing and utilizing energy. Okay. And so your overview is to look at the cell in terms of a living unit and how it utilizes energy. Okay? And within that living unit, how energy is transformed from one form to another and how it's utilized to drive reactions. All right? Or how it's spent to have a reaction occur, or how it's stored in another reaction as energy is released. All right? And some organisms even convert energy to light, as in bioluminescence. All right? Fall, go outside, or in the summertime, you go outside at night, you see these little flies lighting up. What are those? Fireflies. Those are an example of bioluminescence. All right? The fireflies utilize ATP to release energy, and what is released in terms of light energy, that is what you see. All right? Bioluminescence is found in jellyfish, flies, lots of other things. All right? It's very common in marine animals. So, what is metabolism? All right? Metabolism is the sum total of all the reactions that are ongoing in your body right now. Okay? Right now, how many of you have had lunch already? Okay, I just scarfed down a turkey and cheese sandwich before I came here. Literally in 4 minutes. Okay? It's sitting in my stomach and it will be broken down into its absorbable nutrients, which then will be transferred to cells. Okay? Turkey has protein and fat in it, right, in a complex form. That's not absorbable. Okay? So my body has to do a set of reactions to break that down into its absorbable parts. So what do we know? Proteins will be broken down into what? Into amino acids. All right? That is a catabolic reaction. We're going to take a complex molecule and we're going to break it down into smaller parts. All right? Amino acid 1, 2, whatever. Right? Now, those amino acids get absorbed into my body. They get transported throughout the body, through the blood, and eventually end up in muscle cells. Muscle cells take those amino acids and repackage them into proteins, okay, that are usable. So now I'm going from amino acids, 1 through whatever, X or N, and we're going to put them into proteins. Right? We're going to build a bigger molecule. We're going to build things up. Build macromolecules. That is a anabolic reaction. Okay? So inside your body, inside cells, there are catabolic reactions ongoing. There are anabolic reactions ongoing. All those catabolic reactions plus all those anabolic reactions are metabolism. Okay? So, catabolic or catabolism, right? We're going to break stuff. And anabolic, we're going to build. Okay? Catabolic are going to break things down. Anabolic are going to build things up. All right? Now, metabolism is an example of an emergent property of life. right, arises from interactions between molecules, right? Amino acid plus amino acid is going to build a macromolecule, and it's going to produce a protein. That's going to store energy, all right? Typically, those catabolic reactions and anabolic reactions, things that build things up or break them down, are coupled, okay? It is not simply, I'm going to take amino acid 1, 2, and 3 and build them together, here's your protein. Or it's not simply, I'm going to take glucose by itself, break it down, and all of a sudden energy is going to be there. It is a stepwise process, okay? This is what we call a metabolic pathway, all right? Begins with the specific molecule and ends with the product. And each step along that process, because that process is a multi-step process, all right, many steps. Each step has a specific enzyme that allows it to happen. Because I could take, right here in front of us, we have the perfect example, a nice iced coffee with sugar. No sugar, all right, well, there's sugar in it. Wink, wink, okay? With sugar. Sugar in water, it's going to go into solution. It's sucrose. Sucrose is 2 monosaccharides linked together. Your body doesn't absorb sucrose, okay? But it will absorb the 2 monosaccharides. In solution, just sitting here, will that sucrose ever divide into the 2 monosaccharides? No, it'll always be sucrose dissolved in water, all right? Now I add an enzyme to that, all right? A sucrase, an amylase enzyme, or an enzyme that's going to break things down. Now, that sucrose will break into its monosaccharides, okay? So it needs an enzyme that allows the reaction to occur, all right? So an example of a metabolic pathway, we can do this in terms of just starting with glucose, all right? So we start with glucose, which is C6H12O6, plus oxygen, all right, yields CO2 plus H2O, all right? And know that that reaction's not balanced. I don't care. It's not chemistry, all right? That's the overall reaction of what? And then this is also plus ATP. What is that? Respiration, okay? Respiration, cellular respiration, is going to break down glucose in order to produce ATP, okay? But that doesn't happen in one step, okay? It's not, in your body, you're not just burning glucose like you add heat to a sugar cube on the stove and it burns, it turns black, whatever it might be, okay? No, that doesn't happen in your body, okay? There's stepwise reactions that occur that move or change the way glucose is and change the stored energy that's found in glucose into usable parts so that it can be saved in terms of ATP. Okay? Here's your overall example of your starting molecule, enzyme 1, enzyme 2, enzyme 3, each eventually going from product A or starting molecule A to product D. But there are stepwise products in between them. Okay? Questions on a metabolic pathway. Right, go from starting material to ultimate product. So, catabolic pathways release energy by breaking down complex molecules into simpler ones. Cellular respiration is a catabolic process. Right? We start with glucose. We're going to break it down into its parts, into smaller parts, eventually giving off CO2 and H2O. All right? If cellular respiration is a catabolic pathway, give me an example of an anabolic pathway. Anyone? Over there by the wall. Photosynthesis. Okay? Photosynthesis is going to take carbon dioxide, okay, plus light energy with water, and is going to put that into, store the light energy from the sun in the form of glucose, C6H12O6 plus water that's produced. Okay? Anabolic pathways consume energy to build complex molecules from simple ones. All right? So building proteins in your body. All right? These dehydration synthesis reactions, right? What's going to happen with protein? Don't move it. Amino acid 1 plus amino acid 2. Right? Water's going to be taken out, and you're going to get a protein or a peptide. Right? That's an anabolic process. That also requires ATP. So ATP is utilized. All right? So the synthesis of a protein is an example of anabolism or anabolic reactions. All right, so we can build things up and break things down. Sum total of that, if we were to study that, we could call this bioenergetics. How energy is transformed from one form to another in any living system. All right, you could look at it in terms of ecology, how energy is transferred from plants to consumers, right, from producers to consumers in a whole ecosystem. You can look at it at the cellular level, how energy is consumed in terms of glucose and broken down into different parts for whatever work that has to be done for the cell. All right, but sum total of that is bioenergetic. Now, I've been talking about energy in different forms. Stored energy, say in the form of glucose, chemical energy, right? Cellular work, ATP. We're going to talk about the different forms of energy. All right? Energy in sum total means the capacity to do some type of change. Okay? We can talk about kinetic energy, potential energy, chemical energy, stored energy, light energy. All right? But for cellular processes and biology, we are concerned with the ability to do some type of cellular work. All right? So, kinetic energy is the energy associated with motion. All right? Whether it be temperature, the movement of molecules, the movement of ions, right? The movement of substances, the movement of a body, right? All of that is kinetic energy. Something is moving. All right? Thermal energy is an example of kinetic energy. All right? So temperature, you take a temperature of something, it is a measurement of how much thermal energy is present in the system. Okay? So if I have, up here I have room temperature water and I have another beaker full of water that's boiling. Which one is higher in temperature? The boiling water. What is that temperature actually measuring? The thermal energy of the system. What is the thermal energy? Is kinetic energy of what? How fast the molecules are moving. Okay? So here's our little water beaker, and then our other beaker of water at 100 degrees, right? If we were to look at this and look at the molecules of water, right? OH molecules are going to be moving faster. In order for those water molecules to move faster, what's broken? Hydrogen bonds between water molecules are broken. Right? So that is an example of kinetic energy of motion. All right? And so heat, the heat we're actually going to put into the system by heating the water, right, is the transfer of thermal energy from one object to another. So putting it on a hot plate, we're transferring heat from the metal, which is conducted through by electricity, to the other system in water. And water will absorb a lot of that heat until it starts to boil. Okay? Those are all related to a kinetic energy. All right? The opposite, well, the flip side of kinetic energy is potential energy. All right? Potential energy is the energy in matter that possesses because of its location or structure. So it has stored energy. Right? It's held in place. It's in some way or some form. It has the capacity to do something, but is not doing it right now. Okay? I stand up on the desk here, and I have now given myself potential energy. Right? I'm at a higher off the ground. I jump down. That's releasing potential energy, which then is transferred to the earth. Right? That is a change. That's potential energy based on its position. I'm higher up, or structure. Okay? I change a bunch of carbon molecules, oxygen molecules, and hydrogen molecules and structure them a certain way. I have glucose. Glucose has stored chemical energy, which is a form of potential energy. Potential energy. All right? And here's your chemical, right? Is the potential energy for release in a chemical reaction. All right? Energy is converted from one form to another. So in cellular respiration, when we're transferring, we're taking glucose and breaking it down through a catabolic process into carbon dioxide and water in the presence of oxygen. What are we converting energy from glucose into? So let's write out that overall equation again. C6H12O6 plus oxygen yields CO2 plus water plus what? ATP. All right? So the chemical energy in glucose has been transformed into another form of chemical energy, ATP, which the cells will use to do type of work. Give me an example of cellular work that is hydrolyzed by ATP, or how cells use ATP to use some type of work. Give me an example of that type of work. Amy Jo. All right, so making proteins, that's one. Transport, we just went over all the different types of active transport, moving things in. Contraction of muscles, all of that, or relaxation of muscles, all of that is an example of cellular work that is hydrolyzed or is dependent upon ATP. Example of, this animation's there, it's ridiculous. But bow and arrow is an example of potential and kinetic energy. Pull the arrow back, you're increasing potential energy. Once it's released, that potential energy has transformed from potential energy in the tension in the bow through the arrow, producing kinetic energy of the arrow to its target. Again, potential and kinetic energy. All right, standing on a platform, diver has potential energy of falling down. He dives off the platform, that potential energy has transferred, all right, into kinetic energy as he's heading towards the water. Now, thermodynamics. Looking at these transformations in energy, studying how energy is transferred from one form to another, building chemical energy, potential to kinetic, etc. That is thermodynamics. It's thermodynamics. Why is it thermodynamics? We know dynamic means what? Sam? It means change, right? A lot of different things. They'll go from one form to another. Dynamic equilibrium is that there's a change, right? So dynamics, we're talking about changes. What about thermo? Sam? Heat, all right? Why are we specifically looking at heat? Heat is a transfer of energy from one object to another, correct? All right? And in every system, ultimately, energy leaves the system in the form of heat. So we can measure transformations of energy by looking at heat. That's why we're talking about this is called thermodynamics. Changes in heat, and we can look at heat as a measurement of how much energy has gone in or left the system. All right? So, isolated system, right, such as that's as a thermos, it's isolated from its surroundings, it's separate. Okay? This is really a definition of what's a open or a closed system versus an open system. An open system, energy and matter can be transferred between the system and its surroundings. Okay? So our example of the iced coffee or your water bottle sitting on the desk with ice inside, okay, cool. That is an example of an open system. Energy is being transferred from the environment, heat around, into the iced coffee or whatever ice water is sitting on the desk as the ice melts, right? In order for the ice to melt, energy is being absorbed from the system, from the environment. That is an open system. If I was to produce or remove that from the system and keep it, the ice in a thermos, I'm protecting it from its environment. What happens to ice in a thermos? Does it stay solid, colder longer? Yes, because it's not taking up, or it is insulated, separated from the environment. It's not taking energy from the system. All right? Organisms that we're going to be talking about are open systems. Energy can come in. We're going to lose energy to the environment. Right? What form of energy are we going to lose to the environment? Heat. All right, you're listening. Thermodynamics, there's a couple rules of thermodynamics, right? Laws. First law of thermodynamics says energy can be transferred and transformed, but it cannot be created or destroyed. All right? So it's transferred from one form to another, or transferred from one object to another, and transformed from one form to another in terms of potential versus kinetic, but it's not created out of nowhere.
But isn't like ATP, like the main source of energy, isn't that created?
How is it created, though?
Through a reaction?
Through a reaction that starts with what?
Oh, energy.
It starts with chemical energy that's stored in the form of glucose. Okay, so it's not ATP, although it's quote unquote created and produced through a form of reactions. How it's created is transferring its potential energy from one molecule to another, eventually moving that energy into ATP. Okay, so if you look at it like that, it gives you a good idea of, you take glucose, break it down, it's all of the chemical bonds that are formed in glucose are chemical energy, stored chemical energy that we're going to transfer into and then store it in a different form in ATP. Okay, so chemical energy, bear is taking in energy. That's a brown bear. Anyone know brown bears? Where they live? Where? Mainly in Alaska. There's one type of brown bear called a Kodiak bear. It's bigger than all the rest. Anyways, I'm off on a tangent here because my wife actually used to be a zookeeper in Florida and work with these. And so I have some pictures of 12-foot brown bear standing above me, eating peanut butter out of my hand. So, chemical energy in the form of salmon, right, fat, protein, will be stored, right, so that when he's running after more salmon, he can utilize that and transfer that into kinetic energy, all right? And the second law of thermodynamics, right, states that heat is eventually lost to the system. All right? So during every energy transfer or transformation, some energy is not usable. Okay? We can become very efficient in moving and transferring energy from one form to another. All right? However, we are never 100% efficient in saving that energy. Okay? So we burn fossil fuels. We burn gas in our gasoline engines in cars. All right? Over time, how many of you have large cars that use a lot of gas? 16 to 18 miles per gallon. Okay? All right. I get about 65 miles per gallon on my way to work on my Prius. Okay? I use less gas because it's a more efficient process, right? But I'm not getting 100% efficiency out of it. I'm not saving it because even though I have a hybrid and it uses a bunch of electricity, some of the potential energy that's in the form of gas is stored into potential energy in the battery. How is a car going to lose energy to the system in the form of heat? How do you know? Give me a concrete example of how you know that's going to be lost to the system in heat. You have a little thermostat in your car? You start up the car on a cold day. Sienna, you know about this. You live in Pittsfield. It's freezing. Okay? Cold day, the thing goes from C to H. Okay? You start up, engine's cold. That's a measurement of how warm the oil in the car is. You let it sit there for a little bit. It warms up. The heater comes on. Defrosts the thing. Why is it warmed up? What is that? The fact that it's warmed up is your transfer of energy and losing it to the system in the form of heat. All right? You shut the car off. Where it gets to your destination, shut the car off. How does the hood of the car feel? Warm. All right? That is losing energy to the system in the form of heat. All right? So every energy transfer or transformation increases the entropy of the universe. All right? How does that have to do with heat? We talk about entropy of the universe. Entropy is a measure of disorder or randomness. What is becoming more random? So I transfer gasoline, potential energy into kinetic energy, right? Energy of motion. How am I increasing the randomness of the whole system of the universe? Losing a heat. What's happening now? Molecules are moving faster. All right? I'm giving off, the car is giving off heat to the system, which then causes molecules to move faster and increases the motion of molecules, thereby increasing the entropy, right? The disorder of the system. And we're talking about an open system, so going from car to environment is what we're talking about. Going from you to the environment. You're sitting there doing all these catabolic and anabolic reactions while you're listening to my wonderful voice. You're giving off heat, right? You have a body temperature right now. That is a result of all the reactions that are happening in your body, right? Moving things around, breaking things down, building them up, hydrolyzing ATP, eventually being lost to the system in heat. You may be storing energy right now. You're still losing energy to the system as heat. All right? So you unavoidably convert organized forms of energy to heat. Glucose, ATP, plus some type of heat. Now, most of the time, we can break all those reactions down that we talked about that are driven by heat into two different categories, whether they're spontaneous or non-spontaneous. All right? And whether or not they're spontaneous, they happen on their own, is a direct reflection of whether or not they utilize or require energy to be put into the system. Okay? So a spontaneous process will occur without energy input and can happen quickly or slowly, wherever it might be. Okay? In order for a process without energy input to occur, it must increase the entropy of the universe, which means it would give off what? Heat. Okay? So I put sodium hydroxide pellets, solid, in an aqueous solution. Eventually what's going to happen? Sodium hydroxide is a strong base. It's going to dissociate. And as it dissociates, that happens, it's going to turn into ions, sodium and hydroxide. And as that happens spontaneously, happens on its own, but it gives off heat to the system. Okay? So if I left room temperature water here on the bench top, added sodium hydroxide pellets, in about 2 minutes you could feel the outside and it's hot. It's giving off heat to the system. All right? Now, biological order and disorder. Right? And we talk about disorder in terms of randomness or entropy. And the movement or reduction of entropy or in the increase of entropy. All right? And how things are ordered. Cells create ordered structures from less ordered materials. All right? Forming the rough endoplasmic reticulum requires, or the plasma membrane requires the formation of phospholipids, okay, into a certain structure, the formation of amino acids into proteins, those proteins combine with the phospholipids into a certain structure, carbohydrates are added, etc., into a definitive structure. That is an ordered system, going from a less ordered group of phospholipids, amino acids, carbohydrates. All right? Now, you could replace ordered forms of matter and energy with less ordered forms. Whatever. All right? The fact being that you can replace glucose with carbon dioxide, eventually replace it with carbon dioxide, right, as it's broken down. Energy flow through an ecosystem, right? Energy flows through an ecosystem and through the biosphere in general in a certain pattern. You have producers, things that are going to produce some type of chemical energy that's stored from the sun, and then consumers, those individuals that will consume those forms of potential energy. So it flows into the system in the form of light and exits totally in the form of heat. Okay? Questions on thermodynamics? No? Yes?
So the more ordered, the less entropy, and then vice versa?
Yes, exactly. All right, the more ordered, the less entropy. The less ordered, the more entropy. Now, each reaction that we talk about, catabolic, anabolic, has a point where it will happen on its own. Okay? And depending upon what we call the free energy of that reaction will determine whether or not it happens spontaneously or non-spontaneously. Okay? So to figure out whether it happens on its own, we have to figure out the energy changes of the system. This is a... Are you doing energy in chemistry yet? All right. You will. All right, and this is not a chemistry class, so you won't be required to do it on your own, and figure it out. But in a living system, free energy is the energy that can do work when temperature and pressure are uniform, as in a living cell. All right, so temperature and pressure is what we're exposed to every day. Okay, 1 atmosphere or whatever on the barometer, milligrams of mercury. Okay, atmospheric pressure. Temperature for your cells, 37 degrees Celsius, about 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Pretty uniform, right? That's going to happen all the time. Now, within that temperature and pressure, whether or not glucose can be broken down into carbon dioxide, or whether or not that happens spontaneously is up in the air. Okay? If I took glucose, put it on the bench top in an aqueous solution, which is your cells, set it at 37 degrees Celsius in an incubator, so it's the same temperature. We're all exposed to the same pressure. Is glucose going to be transferred to ATP? Or is that glucose going to be broken down into carbon dioxide and water in the beaker? Yes or no? On its own. Who says yes? Who says no? Who just doesn't want to vote? Really? I don't want to be wrong. All right? No, it's not going to transfer on its own. It's not a spontaneous process. It requires a little bit of energy to be put into it. Or it requires some other thing that's going to allow it to happen on its own. Okay? And now we add an enzyme to this beaker solution that's going to be able to allow glucose to be broken down into carbon dioxide. Now what happens? Now we've changed the process. Now we've altered the thermodynamics of the reaction, and it happens on its own, gives off some energy, and it becomes a spontaneous process. All right? So, the change in free energy during a chemical reaction is the difference between free energy of the final state and the free energy of the initial state. What does that mean? Whether or not the product has more energy than the reactants. So let's look at amino acid, right, which would be your reactants if you're going to build a protein, and your protein being the product. Does the product, the protein, have more free energy or less free energy? What's happening to the entropy? What's happening to the order of the system? I add amino acid plus amino acid to build a protein. Am I increasing order? Yes. Am I decreasing entropy? Yes. So does a protein have a higher free energy or a lower free energy than the amino acid? It has a higher free energy. Okay? So in order for that to happen, some energy has to be put in to the system. Okay? Only processes with a negative free energy are spontaneous. All right? In other words, they're going to give off energy to the system itself. Okay? So that the products have a lower energy state than the reactants. All right? Let's look at what that is. So here is our graph of energy, okay? Energy state. And this is just time versus energy amount. Okay? Here's the products or the reactants. And if they're higher, right, that's the blue products, red reactants. And going from here to there, right, requires an increase in energy, in the state of energy. Right? So it has to be, something has to be put into the system. On the flip side, we start with products or reactants having a higher energy state than reactants. It's like going downhill. Right? You go downhill, it happens spontaneously. Energy is given off. The reactants are red. Okay?
So entropy is, there's higher entropy if they're spontaneous.
Let's not say that. Okay? Let's say if there's a negative free energy. Okay? So what's going to happen to this in this overall? Energy state of the reactants in the first reaction, in the first graph on the left, right? It's going to be, the energy state of those reactants is going to be increased, right? So we have to, what happens to the free energy? Is it negative? What's the free? No, it's positive, okay? Because the products are going to have a higher free energy, okay? In the reaction on the right, reactants have a free energy, a one energy level. Then that when you put them together, it's then going to be reduced negative free energy, that is a spontaneous process. All right, energy is given. Now, free energy is technically a measure of a system's instability, its tendency to change to a more stable state. All right? Don't worry about that comment. Let's just strike that out for right now. All right? During a spontaneous change, free energy decreases and the stability of the system increases. All right? So spontaneously, you're going to go from a high energy state to a lower energy state. What happens to that difference in energy? Where does it go? It's released into the environment. That's your entropy. Okay? And then at equilibrium, we know that things are going to go back and forth, right? From products to reactants and whatever, at the same rate. Right? That's your maximum stability. Now, a process, this last part is true. A process is spontaneous and can perform work only when it is moving toward equilibrium. Okay? So if I have all these reactants, I have way more reactants that are put them together, reaction is going to occur spontaneously. As long as those reactants are present in high amounts, they will form products. Once they reach an amount where they're equal between reactants and products, they no longer can do work, and there's no more change in free energy, right? And that doesn't happen spontaneously anymore. Okay? So in order to keep a spontaneous reaction to occur, you have to remove the product, right? Keep the product down, or keep the reactants really high. All right, so here's examples of system. What's happening here in this situation? What's happening to the order of the system? It's the order of the system is decreasing. What's happening to the entropy? It's increasing. Okay? The randomness of the system is increasing. All right, and overall, that results in a lower free energy. Okay? Now, what does this mean in terms of metabolism? Okay? This idea of free energy and whether or not reactions occur spontaneously drive the reactions that are occurring in your body. Right? We can build things up, we can break them down. Whether or not that happens spontaneously depends upon the energy of the reactants and the products. All right? And typically, we can talk about these reactions as being heat giving or heat taking, or giving off heat or requiring heat. Okay? So, exergonic and endergonic reactions help drive metabolism. All right? An exergonic reaction is a reaction that will give off heat. All right? A net release of free energy and is spontaneous. All right? So it's going to give off some type of energy in the form of heat, in the form of ATP, whatever it might be. It is a spontaneous process because the reactants have a higher free energy state than the products. And it is spontaneous. All right? That spontaneous process, right, depending upon the difference in the energy states, can result in some type of work that can be done. All right? So if an exergonic reaction gives off energy and happens spontaneously, what do you think an endergonic reaction? I don't know, understand. What's an endergonic reaction? It's not spontaneous. What else? It requires what to be put in for it to happen? Energy. So the reactants would have a lower energy state than the products, and therefore energy is put in, right? Delta G is positive. This is what you see here. All right? An exergonic reaction right? Here's the reactants, energy state, energy, right? The reaction progresses. Here's the products. There's a change in free energy, right? The products are a lower energy state than the reactants. The opposite being true for the endergonic reaction, right? So even though energy is put in here, right, and even more energy is pushed out of the endergonic process. This is just showing that energy can be put in. It does not mean that energy is required to be put in, okay, in an endergonic reaction. The fact of an endergonic reaction is that energy will be in excess, all right? The products have a higher energy state than the products. All right, so endergonic reactions absorb free energy from its surroundings. It's not spontaneous, and delta G is positive. Okay, the difference in the delta G, the difference in energy state, is a measurement of what is required to drive that reaction to occur. Okay, so you can't just start at a lower free energy state and get to the higher energy state, or just put a little bit of energy in and get to that higher. You have to equal that out in order to put the difference between those energy states in order to drive that reaction. All right, we'll stop there. Questions on exergonic, endergonic reactions? We'll pick up with that on Wednesday. Yay, I won't even see you for that long.